G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Today I thought we could use Christopher Shaw's book Air Aces to have a little bit of a look at the fighter pilots who became aces during the Vietnamese American War. And I call it Vietnam's American War because that's pretty much what it was, and there were only 2 American fighter pilots who became aces during Vietnam's American War in the air. Only 2. Commencing with this as an overview. When operations over the north were brought to a halt for the Air Force at the end of February 1968, all the 86 claims made had been against fighters. 61 MiG-17s and 25 MiG-21s, which had been appearing to grow in numbers since first met in 1966. Losses had been quite staggering. 670 US aircraft by the end of 1967, of which 52% were suffered by the US Navy during 65% of the operations flown. Only 50 of these were known to be in air combat, the balance being believed inflicted by ground defences. However, Vietnamese fighter pilots claimed a total of 320 US aircraft downed. This resulted in the employment of growing numbers of electronic countermeasures, ECM aircraft, notably RB-66s and F-105Fs, to disrupt the enemy's radars and other devices. However, when the 50 aerial combat losses were compared with the 110 confirmed claims achieved up to that date, the kill-to-loss ratio was clearly far less attractive than it had been in Korea. Indeed, during the limited operations undertaken by the US Navy during the first 5 months of 1968, losses in combat were to exceed claims. President Lyndon Johnson's cessation of bombing in the north in an attempt to reach a compromise peace resulted in a lull in operations which lasted from the start of 1968 until the end of 1971. Indeed, the US Air Force was to claim no aerial victories for 4 years, from February 68 to February 72. During the first period of air fighting from 65 to 68, few US pilots of either service were credited with more than 2 victories. There was, however, one remarkable exception, Colonel Robin Olds, who became an ace in World War II, so he didn't become an ace during Vietnam's American War, so we'll pass over him. Nguyen Van Bay. Bay was the first Vietnamese ace to gain the attention of the Western media, transferred to the Air Force in 1964 at the age of 28 after 12 years' service with the Viet Minh. He flew some of the first MiG-17s received in the second company, being credited with 7 victories. These included 2 F-4s in late April 1967, an F-8 Crusader and an F-105. Nguyen Ngoc Do. Do transferred to the Air Force at the same time, and at the same age as Bay, having served for a similar period. With the ground forces, flying with 1st Company, he is known to have claimed an F-105 on 30 April 1967, an F-4 at night, 2 F-101 Voodoo reconnaissance aircraft among his total of 6 victories. By 1971, he had risen to command his unit. Vu Ngoc Dinh. Dinh transferred to the Air Force early in 1967 and was posted to 2nd Company on completion of his training. His first victory was over an F-105, following which he was given command of a section formed specially to combat the EB-66s, and by October 1968, his score had reached 5. His last victory came on 28 January 1970 after engaging some F-4s in cloud without success. He spotted an HH-53B Jolly Green Giant helicopter at low level and shot this down, all of its 6-man crew being killed. On occasions, he is known to have flown a MiG-21 carrying the number 4324. This aircraft was flown by 9 different pilots who jointly gained 14 victories while using it. Nguyen Van Kock. Captain Koch volunteered for the Air Force in 1965, but his training, which took place in Russia, was delayed by his lack of knowledge of the language. He joined the 2nd Company in 1967, flying MiG-21s, and is known to have shot down an 8th TFW F-4D on 23 August of that year, and a Navy F-4 soon afterward. At least 2 of his 9 victories were gained with atoll-guided missiles. When bombing was resumed and air fighting began again in early 1972, all further victories in both the US Air Force and US Navy were gained by F-4s. The F-105 had long been out of production, and the heavy losses of the late 1960s had led to its replacement due to shortage of aircraft of the type, while the F-8 had also been replaced due to its age. The American fighters now found themselves faced by three companies of MiGs, a new third company being formed early in 1972. The MiG-17s and 21s had now also been reinforced with numbers of MiG-19s. The Air Force was now mainly flying F-4Ds plus some F-4Es, while the Navy added F-4Js to its existing F-4Bs. Disappointed with the results achieved with the missiles, the US Navy had reintroduced gun dogfighting after 1968 and even using aircraft equipped only with missiles. Much better results were achieved. Indeed, the US Navy was to achieve 25 victories in 1972-3 for the loss of only 2 of its own aircraft shot down in combat. The US Air Force did not follow suit until October 1972, and in this latter period was able to only achieve a 2-to-1 victory-to-loss ratio. The Navy continued to get the firsts when it gained the first kill of the new phase. This was a MiG-21 shot down on 19 January 1972 by Lieutenant Randy Cunningham of VF-96 for his first success. It was a month later on 21 February before 432nd TFW's Major Robert A. Lodge also brought down a MiG-21 for the Air Force's return to combat. Fighting was fierce during the early months of the year, culminating on 10 May with the biggest, quote, game bag, unquote, of the whole war for the US fighters. On that date, Air Force F-4Ds from the 432nd TFW, that's Tactical Fighter Wing, claimed 3 MiG-21s, one falling to Major Lodge for his third victory and one to Captain Richard S. Ritchie for his first. However, Lodge was then shot down, it's believed, by the Vietnamese ace Lee Than Do in a MiG-19. 3 VF-96 F-4Js, meanwhile, accounted for 6 MiG-17s between them, 3 of these going to Lieutenant Cunningham to make him the first US ace of the conflict. Another MiG-17 was claimed by a VF-81 F-4B and a MiG-21 by VF-92 F-4J to raise the total claims for the day by the Americans to 11. Cunningham's third victory of the day was over Colonel Toon, the Vietnamese top scorer who was killed. The Air Force was to have its own ace of the war later in the year when Captain Ritchie gained his 5th victory, but these were to be the only US, quote, front seat pilots to become aces during the long conflict, when Captain Paul D. Howman of the 432nd Tactical Reconnaissance Wing shot down a MiG-21 on 8 January 1973, he had gained the Air Force's last victory over Vietnam. 49 had been added since the resumption of fighting the previous February, bracket +2 by B-52 rear gunners, end quote, end bracket. These included 41 MiG-21s and 8 MiG-19s. The Navy gained the last victory, another MiG-21 by Lieutenant Victor Kowalski of VF-161 on 12 January 1973 to raise this Air Force's total during the last 12 months to 25. Bracket +1 by a missile launched from a ship. Of the US Air Force's 135 victories by fighters, the most successful unit was the 8th TFW, 38 with 38.5 victories, and within that unit the 433rd Tactical Fighter Squadron with 12. Runner-up was the 432nd Tactical Reconnaissance Wing with 35, this unit's 13th Tactical Fighter Squadron being the second most successful squadron with 11. The US Navy's 58 victories, bracket excluding the 3 by A1Hs and the A4, close bracket, were shared by no less than 19 different fighter squadrons. VF-96 was the most successful with 9 victories, followed by the F-8-equipped VF-211 with 7 and VF-51 with 6. During the Vietnam War, most US victories were gained by two-seater aircraft, and in consequence, it became the practice to credit the rear-seat weapons system radar operators, some of whom were qualified pilots, with victories, as well as the aircraft commander in the front seat. Steve Ritchie on the left, Chuck Bellevue on the right, Randy Cunningham in the front seat, with his talking cargo Bill Driscoll in the back seat. It is not felt in the context of this work that these are true aces, otherwise night fighter radar operators would also have to be considered. 3 US Airmen, 2 US Air Force and 1 US Navy are listed as aces, but actually rear seat men. Their victory totals relating to victories which have also been credited to the pilot. Thus, Lieutenant Willie Driscoll is listed as an ace with 5 victories, these being the 5 aircraft shot down by Randy Cunningham, who was the aircraft commander and pilot. Randy Duke Cunningham served with VF-96 on board the carrier CVW-9 flying F-4J Phantoms. He gained his first victory over a MiG-21 on 19 January 1972, adding a MiG-17 on 8th of May. 2 days later, he was able to claim 3 MiG-17s in a single combat, the largest multiple kill of the war. The third of these, gained after a hard climbing and diving combat, was known to be the top-scoring Vietnamese pilot, Colonel Toon. Cunningham was armed only with missiles during this flight and was of the opinion that had he had gun armament, he could have added up to 3 more to his total. So large was the number of available targets in the air on his side. Colonel Nguyen Toon. Little is known of the top-scoring Vietnamese ace other than that he obtained all his 13 victories during the period from 66 to 68 while flying MiG-17s and 21s, and that he was killed in action in a MiG-17 shot down over Haiphong by Lieutenant Cunningham of VF-96 on 10 May 1972. Captain Richard S. Ritchie flew F-4Ds and Es with the 555th Tactical Fighter Squadron and the 432nd Tactical Reconnaissance Wing during 1972. He gained his first victory during the Big Battle of 10 May 1972, adding another on 31 May, 2 on 8th of July, and his 5th on 28th of August. All his claims were against MiG-21s, and in all cases except May 31, his weapons system operator was Captain Charles Chuck B. de Bellevue, who was involved in 2 other successful combats with other pilots. Nguyen Doc. Doc was commander of the new NVAF 3rd Company, which saw much action during the period from May to October 1972. He was credited with 5 victories. Lei Tan Do, Senior Lieutenant Dao, was one of the 3rd Company's 3 most successful pilots, gaining 6 victories during the period from May to October 1972. He is believed to have shot down Major Robert Lodge of the 432nd Tactical Reconnaissance Wing on 10 May. After that pilot's 3rd victory, Dao was flying a MiG-19 on this date. 2 months later, he shot down another F-4 with an atoll missile. Nguyen Duc Soat, another of the 3rd Company's top scorers in 1972, Soat gained his first victory over an A-7 Corsair attack aircraft on 23 May, then claiming F-4s on 24 and 27 June, 26 August and 12 October. His 6th credited victory was over an unmanned reconnaissance drone. Aces of the Vietnam War. Excited States of Norte Americano, Lieutenant Randolph Cunningham, 5, US Navy. Captain S. Ritchie, 5, US Air Force. Let's forget the weapon system operators. For Vietnam, Colonel Nguyen Toon, 13, Captain Nguyen Van Kock, 9, Lu Hoi Chow, 8, Mai Van Kuong, 8, Captain Pham Van Nan, 8, Nguyen Hong Nai, 8, Nguyen Van Bay, 7, Senior Lieutenant Lei Than Do, 6, Vu Ngoc Din, 6, Nguyen Ngoc Do, 6, Dang Ngoc Ngu, 6, Nguyen Doc Soat, 6, Nguyen Doc, 5, Lehigh, 5, Kyong Mai, 5. So, when the question comes up, what happened in the Vietnam War, and the Americans tell you how they won all the battles, but somehow they lost the war, just remember, in the first period of fighting, out of 86 claims that the US Air Force made, the Vietnamese shot down 670 American aircraft. And that's the story about the fighter pilot air aces in Vietnam's American War. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao. And as I'm sure you've been wondering, this marvellous little bear wearing his flying coat, boots, helmet and goggles is apparently Lieutenant Thomas Hendy, limited edition Australian Flying Corps Bear. This is the certificate of authenticity. He is apparently bear number 1414 of 5,000. A little something I picked up as a late Christmas present for my mother, who has something of an Australian Flying Corps fixation because her father trained in the Australian Flying Corps as a pilot, receiving his wings from the King of England in March 1919. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.